It is 3:17 a.m. on the 26th of November 2025 in a glass-walled dealing room 43 floors above London's Canary Wharf. The overnight dollar-yen pair has been grinding lower for hours, nothing unusual after a quiet Thanksgiving week. Then, without warning, a single red candle the size of a skyscraper rips straight through the chart. Within 8 seconds, the dollar has fallen 2 full yen. Alarms scream. Phones explode. In Tokyo, the Nikkei futures limit down. In Singapore, the oil desks flip every screen from WTI and Brent dollar quotes to Shanghai, eyeing Yuan contracts in real time. By the time the first human trader in Dubai manages to shout, "What the hell is going on?" The entire pricing architecture of global energy has switched. Currencies in front of his eyes. No headline. No press conference. Just a soft, irreversible click. In that precise moment, the 50-year petrodollar system, the invisible scaffolding that let America borrow $36 trillion, fight endless wars, and keep petrol cheaper than bottled water, dies quietly in the dark. And the man who killed it is asleep 7,000 miles away in a marble palace cooled to 19 degrees because Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman does not need to stay awake to watch the old world end. He only needed to let one agreement expire, sign a handful of Yuan contracts and walk away. Rewind exactly 18 months to understand how we arrived at this knife edge. In the spring of 2024, most analysts were still treating the petrodollar as eternal, like gravity or the English class system. The original 1974 understanding between Nixon, Kissinger, and King Faisal had never been a formal treaty. It was a gentleman's agreement sealed with handshakes and aircraft carriers. Saudi Arabia would price oil, exclusively in dollars, and recycle the surplus into U.S. Treasuries. In return, America would guarantee the house of Saud survival against all comers. For half a century it worked so beautifully that both sides forgot it could ever end. Then came the perfect storm nobody in Washington wanted to admit was gathering. China overtook the United States as Saudi Arabia's largest customer in 2018 and kept pulling away. By 2023, Beijing was buying 1 in every 4 Saudi barrels. Riyadh's sovereign wealth fund, the Public Investment Fund, ballooned past $1 trillion and began asking uncomfortable questions. Why park the family fortune in a currency whose owner freezes reserves on a whim? Russia's 2022 swift exclusion and $300 billion reserve seizure became the demonstration every finance minister on earth could not unsee. If it could happen to Moscow, it could happen to anyone. And finally, the Crown Prince himself, a 39-year-old who grew up watching American presidents lecture his country on human rights while selling it bombs, decided the old relationship had passed its sell-by date, so the quiet divorce began. First came the technical groundwork, invisible to the public but deafening to anyone who understood plumbing. Saudi Arabia joined China's cross-border interbank payment system, CIPS, as a full member. The kingdom signed bilateral local currency swap lines with Beijing worth $7 billion, then $50 billion, then unlimited. Project mBridge, the blockchain-based instant settlement platform run by the Bank for International Settlements, added Riyadh as a founding node alongside Hong Kong, Thailand, and the UAE. By early 2025, Saudi banks were testing live oil, payments that cleared in under 12 seconds for a fraction of a penny, no Federal Reserve, no New York correspondent bank, no Office of Foreign Assets Control approval required. At the same time, the Saudi central bank, SAMA, began the greatest silent treasury dump in history. Holdings that peaked at $587 billion in 2014 fell, month after month, until, by November 2025, they sat below $38 billion, a 94% reduction in 11 years. Every billion diverted from Washington bought gold in Shanghai, stakes in Lucid Motors, or construction cranes for NEOM's impossible skyline. Meanwhile, ordinary life in Britain and America carried on. Blissfully unaware that the foundations were being dismantled, families in Manchester and Milwaukee still believed their biggest problem was mortgage rates at 5%. They had no idea that the era of artificially suppressed borrowing, costs was living on borrowed time. The petrodollar had been the greatest subsidy the middle class never knew it received. Every barrel of oil sold created demand for dollars that flowed straight back into Treasuries, letting governments borrow at rates so low they looked like printing errors. That hidden transfer paid for motorways, hospitals, university tuition that used to be free, and pensions that promised more than the maths could ever deliver. When the recycling stopped, the subsidy vanished overnight. Feel the first tremor in the spring of 2025. 10-year Treasury yields stuck below 4% for years, jumped to 5, then 5.5 in weeks. Mortgage rates in the UK breached 7% for the first time since the trust meltdown. Estate agents in the home counties report viewings drying up. Buyers who stretch to 7 times income suddenly can't get approved. In the United States, the 30-year fix crosses 8%, freezing the most rate-sensitive housing market in the world. Construction stops. Lumber mills lay off shifts. Young couples who plan 2026 weddings start talking about postponing children because the numbers no longer work. And still the mainstream media blames greedy lenders or global uncertainty, never connecting the dots to the quiet palace in Riyadh that just rewrote the rules of global money. Now step into the autumn of 2025 and watch the death spiral accelerate. The Federal Reserve, desperate to cap the bond market rout, hikes rates one final time to 6%, then watches in horror as the yield curve inverts harder than 2007. Recession signals flash red. Unemployment, dormant at historic lows, begins climbing. Tech layoffs that started as right-sizing become bloodbaths. London City sees its first major investment bank failure since Lehman, when a mid-tier house loaded with dollar-funded emerging market loans can no longer roll its paper. The Bank of England is forced to launch emergency liquidity facilities everyone swore would never be needed again. And through it all, the man in Riyadh says almost nothing. A single interview on Bloomberg in October, calm, smiling, wearing the white thobe and black aggle like armor. We remain committed to all our partners. We simply believe the future of energy will be multi-currency. Translation. The dollar's monopoly is over. The emotional climax arrives in the last week of November. The same week, the Yuan contract overtakes NYMEX. On Black Friday, traditionally the busiest shopping day of the year, high streets in Britain and malls in America are half empty. Shoppers who braved the crowds stare at price tags and walk away. Television news runs aerial shots of near-deserted car parks outside retail cathedrals built on the assumption of endless credit. That night, in a televised address, the President of the United States uses the phrase economic emergency powers for the first time since 2008. Markets reopen Monday to a 20% drop. The circuit breakers tripping twice before lunch. Sterling falls below 115, its lowest since 1985. The pound-yuan rate, a number barely anyone tracked a year earlier, becomes the new obsession of every trader from Glasgow to Guernsey. Yet even as the old world burns, the new one is already rising from the sand. Fly over the Red Sea coast at night in 2026 and you see a ribbon of light 170 kilometers long where nothing existed 5 years ago. NEOM's The Line is no longer a rendering. It is steel and glass and ambition made real, powered by solar farms that cover an area the size of Wales. Saudi Arabia is now the world's largest exporter of both oil and sunshine, selling gigawatts. To Europe through undersea cables, and to Asia through the grid of tomorrow, the Public Investment Fund, once mocked as a rich kid's plaything, posts returns that humiliate BlackRock and Vanguard. Unemployment in the kingdom falls below 3% while British and American graduates compete for barista jobs. The psychological reversal is total. The desert kingdom that used to beg for American protection now lectures Washington on fiscal discipline. By 2030, the transformation is complete. Global oil is quoted in a basket, 40% yuan, 25% dollars, 15% euros, 20% everything else. The US Treasury market, once the deepest and most liquid on earth, has shrunk by a third as foreign official holdings evaporate. America funds its deficits the old-fashioned way, higher taxes, lower benefits and interest rates that make the 1980s look gentle. The British state pension age reaches 71. Social Security in the United States is means-tested for the first time since its creation. Living standards do not collapse. They simply stagnate for a generation while the rest of the world catches up. The great equalizer is not ideology but arithmetic. And still, in quiet suburbs from Surrey to Sarasota, people adapt. Solar panels appear on roofs because electricity is suddenly the cheapest form of energy. Young couples who postponed children in the crash of 2026 start families. In the recovery of 2032, because houses finally become affordable again when prices fall 30% in real terms. Factories return, not because of patriotism, but because labor and energy are cheap when your currency no longer rules the world. The America and Britain of 2040 are poorer in GDP per capita terms than the versions of 2020, but they are tougher, more self-reliant, and strangely hopeful because the illusions are gone and reality, though harsh, is honest. The black gold has become a black mirror, reflecting back the end of one empire and the birth of another. Saudi Arabia did not set out to destroy the West. It set out to survive the end of oil. And in doing so, it forced the West to confront the end of credit without limit. History will record that the petrodollar died not with a war or a revolution, but with the soft expiration of a handshake in the desert and the quiet courage of a prince who decided his children's future would not be rented from Washington. Whether that future belongs to a humbled West that rebuilds on solid ground, or to a rising East that writes the new rules in Mandarin and Arabic, is no longer Riyadh's concern. The mirror is held up. What we choose to see in it is now the only thing that matters.